Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for being here for CCST's expert briefing on bridging the gap between scientific research and California policy. I'd like to open our briefing today by acknowledging that we are convening on the tribal land of the Nishinan people. Sacramento is a gathering place for many local tribes, including the Southern Maidu, and the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples, and the Patwin Wintun peoples. I'm Jason John, Deputy Director for the California Council on Science and Technology. This briefing is being held as part of CCST's Science and Technology Week, our annual week of events focused on bringing together California's extensive network of academic and research partners with the Sacramento community to tackle the state's most challenging problems. Thank you to everyone who has joined us at our S&T Week events this week. We hope you've made some new connections and generated ideas that you can take back to your own work. Today, I'll briefly introduce CCST, highlight some of our work, and quickly hand it over to our moderator and expert panelists. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established over 30 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. California is lucky to have an incredible network of expertise, and our job at CCST is to help amplify and translate that expertise in this network into actionable advice for policymakers. We do this through a number of mechanisms, including briefings like the one you are attending today. We host workshops, we write peer-reviewed reports, and run the CCST Science Fellows Program, where we place PhD scientists and engineers for a year of government service and leadership training in the executive branch and the legislature. Our fellowship applications are currently open right now if you know any applicants who might be interested, or if any of you watching today are interested in this opportunity. And we'll put a link in the chat for you to learn more info about it. Today, our panel will be focused on the scientific research to policy pipeline in the state, delving into the stakeholders, funding priorities, and communication involved in the process. I'm excited to introduce today's moderator, CCST's CEO, Dr. Julianne McCall. Julianne previously served as the Director of Precision Medicine at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, formerly the Office of Planning and Research, where she oversaw cross-sector health policy working groups and projects, research grant-making, and state government interagency efforts. She was a co-author on the first ever California Surgeon General's report and co-led the development of a nationwide health innovation network for the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H. Julianne is also an alum of our Science Fellows program, serving in the Senate Office of Research in 2017. Welcome, Julianne.
Thank you so much, Jason. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final event of the 2025 Science Technology Week at the Capitol. Since Monday, we've heard from various speakers how research informs state policy, particularly through the $100 million California Climate Action Initiative, a grant that was provided to the University of California system with many partnerships with the California State University system as well. Today, we're pulling back the curtain just a little bit to learn more about the connections between research and policy, how priorities are set, as well as the various methods for how research findings are disseminated in a way that supports policymaking across state agencies as well as legislative offices. We'll also, especially considering the federal landscape at the moment, we'll also discuss kind of sustainability of research funding. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation and encourage everyone in the audience to utilize the Q&A function for an opportunity to pose your own questions to our amazing panel here. So I'm thrilled to have 4 wonderful panelists joining us for this conversation. One by one, I'll invite them to introduce themselves as well as their organizations. So up first, we have Krista Kamer, the Executive Director of the California State University Council for Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology, known as CSU COAST. Dr. Kamer?
Thank you so much, Julianne, and thank you to CCST for inviting me to be here today to talk about the work that we're doing within the California State University. I'm Krista Kamer. I'm the Executive Director of the CSU Council on Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology, known as COAST. So COAST is the CSU's system-wide consortium for ocean and coastal research, education, and workforce development. We integrate system-wide expertise and assets and promote multi-campus collaborations to advance our knowledge of ocean and coastal systems. We support basic, applied, and solution-oriented research conducted by CSU faculty members and both undergraduate and graduate students. We serve all 23 campuses of the CSU, which is one of the nation's largest and most diverse public four-year universities. And the CSU is really the perfect place to develop the diverse workforce that will lead ocean and coastal research, management, and policy development in the coming decades. One of our main foci is supporting evidence-based decision-making and sustainable policy development. And today I have the opportunity to talk to you more about one of the specific ways that we're doing that. Thank you, Julianne.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamer. Next, we have Dr. Tracy Richmond McKnight, Director of the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program, shortened to TRDRP. Dr. McKnight. If you're able to join us. Wonderful.
Hi, it didn't let me join at first. Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Richmond McKnight. I am the Director of the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. TRDRP is one of 3 programs within the state that uses a portion of the taxes on tobacco products to fund research in tobacco-related diseases. The other 2 programs do not fund research. They use a portion of the tobacco taxes to promote school-based education in tobacco use and prevention. Also, the other one is in the Department of Public Health, and they use a portion of the taxes to run ad campaigns and fund local interventions and local organizations working in tobacco control. So the 3 of us, the 3 agencies comprise the comprehensive tobacco control program within California. A little bit about me. I am a scientist myself. I'm a trained scientist. I have a degree in bioengineering from University of California, Davis. And I had a career as a faculty at UCSF, doing neuroimaging and bioengineering research for many years. I decided to come out of the lab and join the space of research grant making in order to understand more about how to bring research to the public and specifically to policymaking. TRDRP is well positioned to do that, which is one of the reasons why I ended up here at TRDRP. I'll tell you a little more about TRDRP and its functions and its role in policymaking or contributing to policymaking later in the panel. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKnight. Next, we have Elisa Tong, Director of the Tobacco Cessation Policy Center at UC Davis. Please, Dr. Tong, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Julianne, and thanks to CCST and TRDRP, which is our funder. So I'm Elisa Tong. I'm a professor of internal medicine at UC Davis. The health campus is based in Sacramento. And I've been doing research on tobacco cessation and policy for over 25 years now. I am the director of the TCPRC, so the Tobacco Cessation Policy Research Center. We are one of 3 research centers funded by TRDRP, and we are a community academic partnership. Our lead community partner is American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, where we are asked to do rapid response policy studies. So we have a community core that helps generate those questions. We have an evaluation core, we have a training core. So our mission is to help advance and generate data for healthcare access, delivery, engagement, and also equity for tobacco cessation policy. So more to come when we talk more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. And to round out this panel beautifully, we have Alyson Sattler, the Executive Director of the WHH Foundation. Director Sattler.
Hi, thank you so much, Julianne. It's so lovely to be here. I have to say, in prep for this panel, I've learned so much, and I just feel like I'm amongst a group of just incredible women. So thank you so much for having me here. As you mentioned, I am the executive director for a family foundation called the WHH Foundation. We're located in Southern California, and we are exactly that. So we are a mid-sized family foundation that that exists basically to, fund dollars back into the nonprofit sector. One of the reasons I think that I'm here today is we have done a significant amount of funding in the science and research and educational space over the years. I think the primary connection has been through Caltech, and we also have a relationship with CCST, which I'm learning quite a bit about. I will say, in my time here, which I've been at the foundation for about a year, one of the things that has really been a differentiator and a distinguisher for us has just been this idea of funding less towards the application of science and more towards the fundamentals. And I think we'll probably get into that and talk about that a little bit more later, but thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited for the conversation to come. Thanks, Julianne.
We're thrilled to have you. So a reminder to those of you who've joined since the webinar started, we highly encourage you to use the Q&A feature on Zoom. It's located in the main menu at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions to our panel, along with your name and affiliation, if you could, please. So to get us started, I would love to pitch a question first to you, Tracy and Krista. One of the goals of this panel, of course, is to highlight existing examples of entities connecting research to policy in California. In your case, of course, a tobacco-related disease program, as well as a CSU COAST program, the council. Your organizations sit at this really interesting intersection between researchers and the state. If you could please give a further overview of each of your programs, how they came to be, how you solicit research proposals for funding, all that's in a way that is policy responsive or policy proactive. That would be wonderful. Tracy, please.
Thank you. Okay, so TRDRP and the sister organizations in the Department of Education and the Department of Public Health were actually founded in, were initiated in 1989 after the passage of the Proposition 99, which increased the taxes on tobacco products and directed a portion of those taxes to be used for those three activities in tobacco control. So we were brought in by the voters of California, in short. Excuse me. And we fund research. I know the name is tobacco-related diseases. So of course we fund research in cancer and lung health and heart health. But we also fund research, a significant portion of research in looking at existing policies that impact tobacco use within the state, as well as the development of new potential policies. A lot of that involves social science research, looking at who's using tobacco products and why, and the impact on their entire environment, not just their health, but their environment, their homes, and their family lives. We have, our funding is dependent on the use of tobacco. So it's very interesting. As we do our job well and provide evidence of the ills of tobacco and how to avoid the ills of tobacco use, we hopefully have actually contributed to the decline in tobacco product use within California, and so our funding sources decline. So it is a declining funding source. As far as how we select projects to fund, we have an annual review cycle that is modeled after the National Institutes of Health, which is part of the federal government, part of HHS. NIH funds a large portion, I want to say the majority, of health research throughout the nation. Excuse me, we select experts throughout the state to come and review. First of all, we develop RFPs that we advertise throughout California, because we can fund any California entity, mostly nonprofits such as universities, private and public universities, community organizations, community research organizations also. But we also will fund a small number of for-profit companies that are doing work at the community level. So we solicit, we develop RFPs annually, and those RFPs are comprised of both individual investigator-initiated grants, where one investigator proposes a body of work to do over 2 to 3 years. Or we also fund some initiatives such as the Tobacco Policy Research Centers, of which Dr. Tong is the director of one of 3 that we fund. Those tend to be our initiatives are multi-investigator, and typically multi-institutional also. And we hold review panels. The grants are selected primarily on scientific merit, but also on alignment with the state's goals of reducing the impact, the negative impact of tobacco use within the state. And we provide the funds. I'm trying to think of the rest of your question. Maybe I'll move to Krista, and maybe we can come back to it if I haven't answered it. Thanks.
Oh, that was perfectly comprehensive. Thank you, Dr. McKnight.
All right. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Julianne. So in addition to the basic and applied research that we fund throughout the CSU, we developed a new program in 2020 with one-time funding from the state, and we think it's pretty unique. It's called the State Science Information Needs Program, or SSINP, and it directly supports the state of California's highest priority needs for ocean and coastal scientific information. So we work with state natural resource management agencies from the very beginning to develop the RFPs that we issue. So the state, we have iterative discussions with the state agencies to identify their specific research objectives that they need answers to so that they can do their jobs. So we've worked with the Coastal Commission, State Lands Commission, State Water Resources Control Board, California Energy Commission, and Fish and Wildlife, as well as federal agencies, the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, and NOAA. So to date, we've funded research projects on microplastics, sea level rise, ecological restoration, and right now we have an RFP open on offshore wind energy development. So these are all really critical issues for state agencies. So as I said, we have these very specific research objectives. It's not just go research whatever you want on sea level rise. It has to be aligned with the state's needs. So I thought I'd provide an example of a very specific objective developed by, it was initiated by one agency, but multiple agencies supported this. And so the state wanted to know how low-income communities, communities of color, and other marginalized communities, how their access to the shoreline for recreation will be impacted by sea level rise. So that's really specific. And at the same time, it's a very broad question because it involves a lot of different approaches. We put on an RFP. CSU researchers have to be the lead PIs, but they can collaborate with folks outside the CSU, of course, to produce the best science. And then we do, like Tracy said, an intellectual merit review similar to NSF with experts in the field. Then the proposals that are deemed competitive go to a separate state agency panel with all of the state agency folks who help develop the RFP, and they ultimately select the projects for funding. And even though different state agencies are in the Zoom room and have different priorities, they've really to date all come to consensus on what their top ones are. And so instead of an applicant, when they apply to a funder, saying, well, this is how my research could be used, we've really turned the whole process on its head, because the state agencies are saying, here's the research that we need. We are going to use this to do our job. So that's the model that we've developed. Like I said, we've spent about $3 million so far in new investments in research, and we have another RFP open right now, and we'll have another one in 2026, again, based on the state's priorities. Thank you.
Wonderful. Dr. McKnight, would you like to add, right, your ongoing, right? What is the channel of communication look like between you and the Department of Public Health, for example?
So, great question. So that's one of the wonderful things about being a part of the California Comprehensive Tobacco Control Program. We are overseen by a body called the Tobacco Education Research Oversight Committee, very original name, TROC for short. And TROC, all three programs report to TROC on a quarterly basis. So we continually communicate with each other and with our oversight organization about the work that we're doing. And we also receive guidance that way. The three programs also meet regularly outside of TROC meetings. We've begun doing that the last few years and found that to be a way to really keep in a close contact with the rapidly changing tobacco product use landscape. And I must say, when I talk about tobacco here, I'm talking about commercial tobacco products. I am not talking about the ceremonial use of tobacco products by tribal groups.
Thank you so much, both of you, for providing us these examples of how research has already established these foundations to ensure that the research outcomes are policy relevant and filling much needed, timely policy questions. So within that same vein, Dr. Tong, you are leading one such policy center within, oh, I'm so sorry. Of all times. Okay, Dr. Tong, so we can define the research to policy pipeline, as a process of translating and applying research generated in the state and elsewhere, to relevant policy issues. So what would you say are the most significant challenges researchers face today when attempting to translate their research findings into actionable policy recommendations in California? And how does the Tobacco Cessation Policy Center work to mitigate those challenges?
Great. Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, usually in traditional academia, you have a thought, you get a grant and you work on the project and then you publish it and you hope it comes out maybe in a year or something. It's a very long process. And I think people say all the time, from discovery to implementation, and then, of course, policy, it takes years. So how to accelerate that? So I really appreciate this whole Policy Research Center infrastructure. TRDRP really put a lot of thought into it. My previous experience with policy as a healthcare researcher, a health services researcher, had been with CHBRP, the California Health Benefit Review Program. So that's, somebody already has a bill out and then everybody rushes in for, if you're a topic expert, to try to weigh in and get that going, That's a whole UC infrastructure. But this one, it's designed to say this is a community academic partnership. What are those research questions that are timely and important to the community or policy stakeholders? Where do you find that data? That's kind of on us on the academic side, or we start asking around, because sometimes in academia you can ask questions that maybe other folks can't in their usual line of work, especially if they're under a state government framework. What's the time frame? What's the audience? And so I'm not necessarily the best person to answer that. And so that's why I really appreciate the infrastructure of this Policy Research Center, where we have a lead community partner. And also it's, not just state level, but local level, where we try to say, what are those questions? What are those data needs? And so just as a concrete example from our first year of our Policy Research Center, our partner, ACS CAN, said, hey, we need some information about the enforcement need for our state law that bans the sale of flavored tobacco. This is policy implementation. Where can we get data? So, kudos. I saw Melanie Dove, our assistant director, is on today. She helped. We pivoted from our original question and, went down this rabbit hole of, does Department of Justice have this data? Does the state tobacco program have this data? We went to CDC to look for data. So, we were able to help generate data to create a policy brief that then our community partner could get to the stakeholders that needed it. So that was a really great learning experience for me, trial by fire. But this is, I think we are now more seasoned in how to do this. But I think this is a great partnership, and that infrastructure and expectation that it's not just published in a peer-reviewed journal. Please get data out there that's actionable. A policy study can be a rapid response policy study can be 2 weeks, 6 months. That pressure not to just publish, which is the academia, currency, I think that is what helps us be more responsive.
That's extraordinary, and I know that your partnership with the community, right, is very much a co-leadership, right? The co-design, the co-implementation, the co-dissemination, right? Partnership in the truest sense.
Yes, and for academic researchers, I mean, my heart has always been in community engaged research, and TRDRP's always prioritized that. That's actually been one of my first research grants, was some of the community academic mechanisms. So I think there is a way for funders to structure it, and also I think TRDRP has learned over time how to give money separately to community partners, so it's not a sub-award. Then maybe we'll talk more about that, but that has made things, more amenable to working together. But yes, you do have to kind of be embedded and develop those relationships and trust, and be there for folks, not just ask folks to come to the academic institution.
Thank you for shining a light on the appreciation for that research policy, right? The design of the research administration to ensure that that co-partnership truly is elevated. Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. And of course, Dr. Sattler, right, as a member of the philanthropy and funding community, right, supporting these various initiatives, the world needs so much, right? We would love for you to help us understand what key factors shape your funding priorities, and in your view, how funders can more effectively engage with and support these types of multidisciplinary and cross-sector collaborations to actually get policy questions answered in a timely fashion. I would also add, right, how you factor in the utilization of the research that you fund.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I might state some things that are pretty obvious kind of at the top of this, but, in the philanthropic space, it is the wild, wild west. So every single philanthropic entity out there has its own agenda, its own set of priorities, its own issues that it deems important and wants to tackle in the world. And so we're not the most user-friendly group of people out there to tap into and to access. And I'm just going to own it for the call today for private philanthropy. But I think that there's a few windows in to actually figuring out how to work with family foundations and how to work with corporate foundations and how to work with even like larger, more institutionalized philanthropic entities. And this panel just outlined it so well. And I think it is this balance there's been a movement, I think, to strike a balance in philanthropy to figure out how to manage dollars that are impacting and affecting system change work versus just managing the symptoms on the ground. And, there's a lot of discussion around this. I will openly say, I don't think philanthropy is great. We're learning as we go to figure out how to kind of navigate through that space. But truly, the system change happens at the policy level. And so if private philanthropy wants to engage in that space, it's actually carving out those pathways to developing relationships and actually figuring out how to effectively support entities that are already doing it. I don't think we need to recreate the wheel. I think the wheel actually already exists. What I would love to be able to see more of is forums and convenings where private philanthropy can connect into the entities that are already doing this work. And I think that there are so many issue-based areas where private philanthropy can kind of come to the table and say, like, these are causes that we really care about. And maybe our dollar can go further if we're working in partnership with entities that are already kind of driving the agenda based on subject matter experts that, we know are already prioritized on kind of what needs to happen next. And I just feel like we heard some great examples of how that works. the key is building relationships and kind of figuring out how to build trusted relationships so that there can be a really open conversation about directing the philanthropic dollar where it's needed most. It could be that in some of these, partnerships, philanthropy can step in and actually fund the community so that the community voice can carve out the space and the capital within their organizations to participate in the research-based work. Or on the flip side, I mean, I will say one of the things that I've started paying more attention to is just like the runway between applying for government funding and receiving government funding. Can private philanthropy step in to do short-term funding to be able to launch research-based programs to like shorten the time and really the time that it takes between the application for government funding and when government funding is received. And then I think kind of the last piece that I would say I'm becoming more and more interested in as a director of a family foundation is figuring out how to leverage my relationships to get the right people in the room together. This isn't a funding proposition necessarily, but it's actually sort of saying, should we be connecting folks that we know on the academic side with folks that we know in the community side with folks that we know on the policy side, just to help grease the wheels of building those relationships? I'm going to pause there just to see if there's any follow-on questions, but those are my initial thoughts.
No, it's wonderful. And would you say that most philanthropic organizations have a special portfolio outside of which they would not welcome inquiries? How would you?
Yeah, I definitely would say that. So, I mean, I think, here at WHH, I'm not a great example because our mission is literally to invest in human capital to make the world a better place. And you can interpret that in about a million different ways. But I do feel like there's a lot of philanthropic entities that look at health and wellness. They're honestly trying to chase down dealing with substantive issues that are impacting, people on a day-to-day basis, whether it's from an environmental lens or whether it's from a, social and human service lens. Having said that, the conversation I think to have with some of these foundations is, what does it mean to set aside some dollars to invest at the policy level rather than just kind of sourcing 100% of your budget to go to nonprofit organizations that are really, and I don't want to sound cold and callous, but, managing the symptom kind of on the ground. And it's about like, how do you smartly and effectively do that? And my suggestion would be it's just through partnership with the folks that are already working at the policy level so that maybe your smaller dollars that get allocated there go further because you're working collaboratively.
We see this from the government angle all the time. The taxpayers want to see that the dollars are going to fixing the problem rather than advertising about the fix to the problem. But without a balanced approach, in too many cases, it seems like the research does not progress, to the policy conversation without that additional infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, and you're kind of hitting on something there too, which is, I don't think a lot of people who are necessarily in especially the family philanthropy space or even the corporate philanthropy space have a lot of exposure or access into really how this stuff works and how it happens. And so I will say, like, even just being able to collectively talk a little bit more about what are the levers that will promote change is critically important. And it's not easy, actually, right? Like, I don't think these are intuitive conversations, but I think we need to have more of them.
Oh, we couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Director Sattler, for that very unique perspective to the research and research policy sphere. So this question is for all four of our panelists. And before I pose it, I do want to reiterate what was just submitted in the chat by CCST staff. Thank you again, McKenna Sullivan. All right, for those of you in the audience, we're nearing the point where I will open it up to your questions. So please feel free to submit your questions within the Q&A function of Zoom. So with that said, so looking forward, to all of our panelists, what are some factors to take into account in the building and maintaining of successful research action, like policy action pipeline across the various disciplines? In other words, how do you build sustainability into the funding of research infrastructure, and what are some immediate steps that we need to take? Dr. Kamer.
I'll jump in. So as it was mentioned before, it's just these trusting relationships. So one-on-one relationships with people at the entities that we're collaborating with, and often that leads to building relationships with other individuals, but durable partnerships, where I think we've shown over the years that we can deliver. And especially, and I know Tracy will reiterate this, but for translating science into policy, you can't be an advocate for a specific outcome. You're not here to advocate for a specific policy. You're here to inform policy development and decision making. So that sometimes is called an honest broker. A little bit wonkier term I heard was a neutral arbiter of information, which is kind of a mouthful. But I think it's those partnerships where people know that you can deliver and they trust you to do what you say you're going to do. In terms of funding, we have one-time funding from the state, and that's going to run out. So we need something more sustainable going forward so that we can keep doing this SSINP program. So thanks.
So I'll jump in, and I want to build on Krista's point about building, trusting, doing collaborative work correctly the first time, collaborative work that is informative and results in useful outcome the first time, so that you have the trust of the state. It is a model that that TRDRP has used and built over the years. So the policy research centers are one example, but Elisa talked about the long history we have of doing community partnered research and building trust among the partners. We're one of the few, unlike the federal government, when we fund partnered research, each partner gets the same amount of money and the same amount of time to do the work. So that's different, but it builds trust within the community. We also have trust from the people who use the information that comes out of that, because we have some of our researchers out of those have developed programs that are now used throughout the schools in California. And they're programs that have to do with preventing students from taking up tobacco products, and now preventing them from taking up vaping, and preventing them from now taking up THC products or cannabis products. So this is an existing generalizable scheme. The other way that we do it, that we try and build sustainability in, although we have a declining funding source, is that we have begun to invest a lot in training. And training has to do with research. Yes, we do fund a lot of young researchers who are either still in their university training. We also fund people that are working in community organizations about how to do research. They may not be in school at the time, but they can still participate in a project, and we need that. We have training programs based at CSUs and community colleges, where those students are also learning dissemination and policy, advocacy work, understanding how their work can inform advocacy. That's a part of the training curriculum. And the last thing I want to say is that we also work very hard with our researchers in general on communicating to the lay public. It's not something that is a part of traditional academic training, and it is very difficult for a lot of scientists to translate their work. It's very different cultures. The spin that is inherent to politics and political speech is an antithesis, is complete opposite of what academic researchers are trained about. No spin. You have to be specific about everything that you say. You have to talk about the exact set of experiments that you did and what those specific outcomes were. And interpretation is not only frowned upon, it is not condoned at all within the academic research community. You're not supposed to kind of look at the gray area beyond that. So getting them to understand that it's okay to put things into terms that people can understand, and you're not committing fraud by by trying to bring the information that you have gleaned in the lab or in your studies or in your computer to how it might impact the public. That's a bridge that we work on every day. We do provide for our researchers. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we're in a unique time, right, where we're understanding research with a fresh lens. That this 75-year-old story of as soon as academics do their work, they hand it off to industry and allow them to take it the rest of the way, and how rarely that is the case. It's the exception, not the rule. And to engage, right, policy and community, right, from the earliest stages. Thank you so much for being such an example. Dr. Tong.
Yes, I just want to add one more thing to what Tracy said, because in our center, we have a training core, which, traditionally you try to get, early stage investigators their grants, which is great. But, we're trying to also work with our cancer center to take a broader lens. And research is such an intimidating word. I mean, all you have to do is just get data and analyze it, in a thoughtful way, and just maybe sometimes have help to understand it, right? So even thinking about the whole pipeline, high school students, college students, some of our medical trainees, just thinking, what are they seeing? How do they look at data sources? How do they turn that into something actionable? We're trying to think of that lens also. So it's not just, those researchers in the ivory tower, that anyone, you can be sort of a research scientist in your own community.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sattler, would you like to comment on the sustainability? Oh, it looks like you might still be muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the question that we are all facing right now. And I feel like there's a lot of different access points into how sustainability works. I mean, there's always the fallback on the philanthropic side and in the nonprofit sector to say sustainability. It's like one part endow, it's, one part really thinking about what your revenue model is. It's one part, work a little bit harder. And I honestly don't know if that's the answer. I mean, I think that, really, I think that there's kind of another comment just about, and I want to double down on this, like the world is increasingly complicated and moving increasingly quickly. And so I do think that fundamentally we have to look at some of these systems that have been set up to provide funding, and how do we encourage change to happen in those spaces. And so, new innovative practices on the philanthropic side, I think are interesting to look at. The impact investing space has the maybe ability to open up way more capacity when it comes to funding, and how do you apply that impact investing piece to this work, I think is a really legitimate and interesting question. And then I think on the flip side, government funding has always been the cake and philanthropy has always been the frosting. So and it's a question I don't have an answer, but, how do we become more engaged in understanding about directing governmental funding and positioning it to be actually more sustainable for, organizations like those that are represented here today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for such a rich discussion. I would like to now hand it over to our audience. We have one question from Trisha Lee, who comments that Dr. Tong mentioned the pace of science being mismatched with the need for information for decision-making purposes. So to the whole panel, what proposed methods or lessons learned would you recommend for addressing that mismatch of time and information needs?
Well, I'll jump in, even though I didn't know whether Elisa was going to jump in. But built into all of our policy centers is a mechanism that is called a rapid response mechanism. So that's one thing where they have to show how they will be able to turn around, get research done within 3 to 6 months, which is really unheard of in academic research. So kind of actively funding short-term research. Also, the model that Krista uses is something that we have used in the past also, where you put out a request for quotes. Basically, you say, this is the question that needs answering, and we have to know by this day in order to give the legislature the information they need to make a decision on this bill. And you put it out there to who believes they have the time and the resources, capacity to do it, and they do the work. So doing a more contract-based work than a competitive based. But those are two concrete ways to address that.
Just to follow up with Tracy, I mean, I think this idea in academia of putting out policy briefs, which, you know, some folks do, but then where do you get that information out to, you know, and you have to start knowing those networks of community or policy stakeholders who can make it more actionable. So yeah, those relationships and partnerships are very key. And in academia, you know, we do get rewarded for university service, or at least it's, you know, but it's not really something that's formally encouraged. But I think to do this kind of work, you do have to find centers or networks of folks that are aligned with this. And you know, one way that I got into all this was my the former director of the UC Center Sacramento, Rich Kravitz, who's one of my colleagues. You know, he created a whole, you know, network of experts and brought us, you know, to speak. And I had me speak on flavored tobacco, and I didn't talk about imposter syndrome sometime. I wasn't quite ready. It wasn't quite my field, but I could talk enough. And I brought my community partner, and that just, I think, led to some of the work we've been doing. So yeah, just being, you know, for the academics who might be on, you know, just being out there and, you know, starting those conversations with people. You just don't know where that will end up, but it might be for the, you know, the common good.
If I can contribute, it's been our experience that there's sometimes two different timelines in Sacramento. There's the timeline of the state agencies, where they do have the ability to plan. And when we sit down and talk to them, especially, you know, over and over and over, they say, well, this is what's coming. So for example, we've known for years that offshore wind is coming to California. At this point, we don't know how much longer it will be, but it's coming. And so the state agencies know, here are the things that we need to know before it goes in the water. It's different, I think, when you're talking to staff in members' offices and they need information yesterday. I mean, sometimes they have 2 hours to figure out what their boss wants to know. And one of the things we've developed are lists of experts that we prepare. And so they're people that know that we may call on them, and they are expected to respond within about 24 hours. That because, as Tracy was saying, the pace of research is glacial compared to what's going on in the building. So we have a number of different strategies. And then the SSINP research is designed to be responsive to those state agency needs that are over a longer time scale. But we're also pushed the faculty to do work, $500,000 projects in about 24 months, and they will not get an automatic 1-year no-cost extension. The goal is for it to be timely, and then to have iterative discussions with the stakeholders throughout the life of the project as well, so that they're not just waiting till the end. But I think it's a very good point, Dr. Tong, that there is a massive mismatch between what legislators, decision makers, and policymakers need and academic research.
Alyson, would you like to contribute as well to this mismatch of timing?
I don't know if I have much more to add. I mean, I think the strings that are kind of interesting for me to pull is how do you engage the public in that conversation too, as a lever to either slow down the policy making because there's not the right amount of information out there, and or kind of prioritize a little bit, help to prioritize what the agendas are. I think I don't want to sound totally defeatist, but the system's not working. So to me, what's interesting is just thinking about what are the levers that we can pull to help start adjusting the system so that there is an opportunity for more alignment around certain key areas that we know have high impact for communities and, and our neighbors. So that's a non-answer, but thanks for asking.
It helps it, contribute this multifaceted set of lenses through which we need to understand the research to policy pipeline. Well, thank you all so much. And once again, we appreciate the question from the audience. Our next question pertains to this concept of a group of PIs versus individual PI research. Particularly with the TRDRP and the COAST program, right? You represent a network of researchers, right, across various academic and community settings. What would you say are the benefits and potential drawbacks for researchers working together as a group versus as individuals for accessing funding in particular? Dr. McKnight.
I don't, well, I'm going to change your question. I'm sorry. I don't really know if there's a benefit or not as far as accessing funding, as far as the researchers accessing funding. I have to think about that a little bit. But what I do know is about policy impact, the ability to make policy impact. And I can think of it more that way. And I would say that the consortia, that the multi-investigator groups that we fund are better positioned to impact policy. And partly it's because of, I like to think of our Third Hand Smoke Consortium, which is like one of our flagship programs and hopefully has brought the term third hand smoke to the public. And third hand smoke is the smoke that exists in the homes and the surfaces of where who smokers have lived. And it is toxic to make it short and sweet. But that concept, that knowledge came about 10, 15 years ago among different individuals. Some of the toxicologists in the States were realizing it. Some of the health researchers in the state were realizing it. Some of the environmental researchers were understanding this. And rather than having them, rather than supporting them independently, we brought them together and decided to start funding them as a consortium that had a policy project as a component, meaning so these were people who were already engaged in policy research and also making connections with the state. That model turned out to be wonderful because now that's one of the consortia, that's one of the areas that we've been able to impact policy on the federal level, honestly, as well as on the state level. They are now looking at building standards for how people can detect this in their homes and measure and things. And so they have, so working together on all fronts, getting all the health information as well as all of the environmental and policy impact information at once has been very helpful at translating.
Thank you. Dr. Kamer?
Thanks. In the State Science Information Needs Program, SSIMP, with these very specific research objectives, many times we need a team of researchers with different skill sets to come together in order to address the questions. So I talked before about how sea level rise affects people's ability to access the coast for recreation. That involved both coastal geomorphologists as well as social scientists to understand the human dynamics involved with it, going to the coast. Another one that we funded was how sea level rise contributes to the mobilization of contaminants underground, where we've got all kinds of storage tanks and weird facilities like industrial sites and landfills and hazardous waste disposal. And those are often co-located with lower income communities and communities of color. So here we have hydrologists and geologists working with social science and analyzing census tract data. So for that specific program, it's been really important. And I don't think they could necessarily succeed as individuals. It's taken a team approach to answer those questions. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I know we're nearly at the end of our time together, but we do have a question that just came in that really is an impactful one from an anonymous source. Thank you, whoever you are. The elephant in the room question is how they introduce. So federal STEM and STEM adjacent agencies, which are the scientific research innovation engines of our country, are currently being destroyed, defunded, and or dismantled outright. Since many California research and education entities are leveraging those federal funds, are you all taking the time to strategize around ways that scientific research and research education in California has an opportunity to survive and adapt to this era? And how would you begin to respond with strategies? I'm sorry, we have only 2 minutes across the entire panel, but how would you begin to answer that? It's the burden of
call
being
on us, Julianne. You're going to have to call on us.
I would say for us, I think we're very lucky to live in California, where we have, I know the state budget's been up and down, but this year it's pretty robust. I think it's slated to be the second largest budget ever, and California has such a strong environmental focus that for us, that's been helpful. Coast is funded almost exclusively by the state. Now our researchers, however, throughout the CSU are not, and I'm very concerned for how their research will be funded when they've been primarily relying on NSF. So it's a big concern.
Dr. Tong, Dr. McKnight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a big concern, and we, I want to say a lot of our work tends to be the type of STEM research that is under attack now, because we do focus on what we call priority populations, the groups that are still smoking, right? The groups that are still using tobacco products. And a lot of times they are from marginalized communities. I think we need to, I have been energized by something that Alyson said earlier, and I've been waiting to say it maybe when this was over, but I have a chance to say it now. She was talking about a way that philanthropy can work. Might be one of the best ways to invest in is to bring the right people in the room, and maybe even and I also interjected bring money into the room, because we have a lot of us as state funded programs have similar or overlapping goals. Coast and TRDRP are both obviously very interested in microplastics at the coast, because cigarette butts are one of the main contributors to microplastics, and it's one of the main problems of the environment. So how do we come together as two state-funded organizations, yet work with Alyson to be in the right room with the right people to do this work completely independent of federal funding, and not in a way that independent of federal funding. I'll just leave it that way. Independent of federal funding. Those are the kind of strategies I think we need to look at, using private and public resources within the state.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKnight, for ending on a practical next step there. With that, we are at time. I would love to hand it back over to Deputy Director, Dr. Jason John, to close us out.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much again to our incredible panelists for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your guidance with us all today. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and throughout this week. If you'd like to watch this briefing again, or have a colleague who is interested but couldn't make it, please visit our website for the recording. You can also sign up for our Spotlight newsletter to stay updated on our events and our cultural expertise. Speaking of expert briefings, we do have 2 of them coming up in February and March, both of them on Zoom. The Climate Change and Human Mobility briefing is on Wednesday, February 19th at 1 p.m., while the Artificial Intelligence and Biodiversity briefing is on Tuesday, March 4th at 11 a.m. The links for both events will be posted in the chat. Thank you all so much again for joining us today and throughout this week. We hope you all have a wonderful day.